Let's talk really quickly about leasebacks. A leaseback is an arrangement where the buyer of a property leases that property back to the original seller. So you have an agreement, you buy a property, but the seller needs some more time after closing, and you decide to give them that time where they live in the house for a period, they pay you rent. They could be sometimes deeply discounted, or it could be negotiated on the actual rental rates for the area. Here are some things from a legal standpoint that you want to make sure you consider during the leaseback process, and of course mentioned in the leaseback agreement. 1. Responsibility of the parties. What exactly is the tenant going to be responsible for? I.e., do they maintain the utilities? Do they cut it off and you as the buyer and turn the landlord is now responsible for certain things? 2, any issues with maintenance or destruction of property. Of course, you don't expect the seller, who is now your tenant, to destroy property, but you might be surprised. Sometimes these things happen. So you want to make sure that you address what happens when there are changes to the property, what happens when certain things have not been maintained the way that they were maintained before the house was sold to you. Now, you also want to make sure to consider, is the tenant going to have rental insurance while they're on the property? What are going to be the allocation of expenses or liability if they have umbrella insurance, if they're having any sort of events on the property and there'll be people coming onto the property? These are things that you want to be aware of. I have a current client, a current situation where there is a lease back and some of the terms weren't clear, and now we have a case of a potential holdover tenant. A holdover tenant is when a person has a lease agreement for a particular period, and then they stay over that period, or they stop paying rent during that period, and now you need to consider evicting them or keeping them on the property. Having said that, it's just very important that whatever you're doing, especially in the case of a leaseback agreement, that the agreement is very detailed. Sometimes it could be part of your initial sale and purchase agreement, and that is fine, but make sure that you're working with an attorney, ideally, and going through the responsibility of each party during the tenancy process. As mentioned, the sale purchase agreement, it is one portion of the transaction. The leaseback is usually a second portion, a follow-up portion, and you want to be sure that the parties that are involved in these two separate agreements are aware of their responsibilities, their roles, the expectations, and that those are clearly stated. If you're in a situation that the tenant has now destroyed the property or made significant changes to the property before you bought the property, and you don't have any language as to how to deal with that, especially because a deposit most likely wasn't put in place because this was a leaseback as part of a transaction. So there are some things you want to be sure that you discuss very thoroughly, because you can't always anticipate what's going to happen, and if you don't have the contractual language to protect yourself, then you're having to deal with these potential issues when you just purchased a property and made an assumption that the seller would take care of it the same way you have. If you have any questions about real estate transaction, real estate legal, be sure to contact the office. We are here to help you.